The smoke in the Lucky Ace saloon hung thick as a funeral shroud when Rose Victoria watched her stepfather throw down his final card, and with it, her entire future. She had been standing in the shadows near the back staircase, waiting tables since sundown, her worn calico dress stained with whiskey and tobacco juice from the evening crowd. The game at the center table had been going on for nearly 6 hours, and Rose had felt the dread building in her chest with each passing hour as Marcus Webb's stack of chips dwindled to nothing. He was not a good man, her stepfather. He had married her mother 3 years ago in 1875, back when Rose was only 17, and her mother was desperate for security after losing everything to a bad crop season. When consumption took her mother 8 months later, Rose found herself trapped under Marcus's roof with no money, no family, and nowhere to run in the harsh reality of San Antonio, Texas. Marcus had always been a gambling man, spending what little money he earned at the Cotton Gin on cards and whiskey. But tonight was different. Tonight he was playing against men who had real money, cattle barons and ranch owners who could afford to lose what Marcus was betting with borrowed funds and empty promises. Rose had seen the desperation in his bloodshot eyes when he stumbled in at noon, demanding she press his good shirt and polish his boots. She had known then that something terrible was coming. The final hand played out in agonizing slowness. Marcus laid down 3 queens with shaking hands, a thin smile cracking across his weathered face. Then the man across from him, a broad-shouldered cowboy with dark hair and storm-gray eyes, calmly spread his cards on the table. A straight flush. The saloon erupted in shouts and whistles, and Rose felt her knees go weak. Marcus went white as sun-bleached bone. He started stammering about needing time, about making good on the debt, but the other players were having none of it. Rose knew he owed nearly $2,000 to the table, money he did not have and never would. She started backing toward the rear door, thinking maybe she could slip out before anyone noticed, before whatever was about to happen caught her in its teeth. "I got something worth more than money," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Rose froze. "My stepdaughter. She's young, healthy, can cook and clean, and she's pretty enough. Worth at least what I owe." The room went silent. Rose felt every eye turn toward her, and shame burned through her body like wildfire. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear into the floorboards, but her legs would not move. This could not be happening. People did not sell other people anymore, not after the war, not legally. But she was a woman alone with no family, no protection, and in places like this, the law was whatever men with power said it was. "That's not legal, Webb," someone called out, but the voice lacked conviction. "It's a private contract," Marcus said quickly, pulling a piece of paper from his vest pocket with hands that shook so badly he nearly dropped it. "She signs willingly, agreeing to work off my debt. Indentured servitude. Plenty legal if she agrees. And if I do not agree—" Rose found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. Marcus's eyes went hard and cold. "Then I tell Sheriff Coleman about how you've been stealing from the general store. I got a witness who'll swear to it. You'll hang, girl. Or you can do this and at least have a roof over your head and food in your belly." It was a lie. Rose had never stolen anything in her life, but she also knew Marcus had friends, men as low and desperate as himself, who would say anything for a bottle of whiskey. Her word against theirs meant nothing. She was 20 years old, alone and trapped. The cowboy who had won the hand stood up slowly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of lean, muscled build that came from hard work rather than brawling. His clothes were worn but clean, and unlike most of the men in the saloon, he did not smell like he had been drinking for days. His face was hard to read, angular and sun-bronzed, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to see everything. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the other rough men in the room. "I want no part of this," he said, his voice low and steady. "Keep your money, Webb. The debt's cleared." "Now hold on, Isaac," another man said, standing up. This one was older, with a silver mustache and expensive boots. "You won that hand fair and square. If Webb's offering settlement, that's between you two. But the rest of us are owed as well. We got a right to what's coming to us." The cowboy, Isaac, turned to look at the older man. "You want to own a person, Thornton. That's sit right with your conscience," Thornton shrugged. "I want my money. However Webb settles his accounts is his business. But if you're backing out, then the pot goes to the next highest hand. That'd be me." Rose looked at Thornton and felt ice water flood her veins. She had seen him in town before, seen the way he looked at women, the way his ranch hands talked about the girls who worked for him. Going to his ranch would be a nightmare she might never wake up from. Isaac stood very still for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing over something bitter. Then he looked directly at Rose for the first time. Their eyes met across the smoky room, and she saw something in his gaze she had not expected. Anger, yes, but not at her. And something else. Something that looked almost like regret. "Fine," he said. "I'll take the contract. But this is between me and Webb, and the lady signs of her own free will, or there's no deal." Marcus nearly knocked over his chair, scrambling to the table where Rose stood. He thrust the paper and a pencil at her, his breath sour with cheap whiskey. "Sign it, girl, sign it now." Rose took the paper with numb fingers. The words swam before her eyes. It was just as Marcus had said. A contract of indentured servitude, her labor to be owned by whoever held the paper until the debt of $1,800 was worked off. At the bottom, it listed her as agreeing willingly to the terms. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pencil. She looked up one more time, scanning the faces in the crowd for anyone who might help her, might stand up and say this was wrong. But she saw only curious stares and a few expressions of pity. No one was going to save her. In this world, women like her had no champions. Rose thought about refusing, thought about making Marcus follow through on his threat, taking her chances with the sheriff. But she had seen hangings before, had seen the way a woman's neck snapped, the way her body jerked and twitched. Fear won out over pride. She signed her name at the bottom of the page and felt her soul hollow out as she did it. Marcus snatched the paper away and handed it to Isaac with a grin that showed his missing teeth. "There. Debt settled. She's all yours." Isaac took the contract and folded it carefully, sliding it into his vest pocket. Then he turned to Rose and spoke quietly, his words almost lost under the renewed noise of the saloon as men returned to their drinking and gambling. "Get your things. We leave in 10 minutes." Rose nodded mutely and walked toward the back stairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She made it to the tiny room she rented above the saloon, nothing more than a closet with a cot and a washstand, and gathered her few possessions into a worn carpet bag. 2 dresses, a shawl, her mother's Bible, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world fit in one small bag. When she came back down, Isaac was waiting by the door. The other players had already lost interest, moving on to new games and new bottles. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, probably already spending money he had not earned at the bar. Isaac held the door open, and Rose walked out into the warm Texas night without looking back. His horse was tied to the rail outside, a big bay gelding with kind eyes and a white star on its forehead. Isaac untied the reins and gestured for Rose to walk with him. They moved through the dusty streets of San Antonio in silence, Rose struggling to keep up with his long strides. The town was quiet at this hour, most folks already in bed. Only the saloons and gambling halls still blazed with light and noise. They walked for nearly 15 minutes, leaving the main part of town behind until they reached a small livery stable on the outskirts. Isaac led his horse into the barn and began unsaddling it with efficient, practiced movements. Rose stood uncertainly by the door, unsure what was expected of her. "There's a room in the back," Isaac said without looking at her. "Clean straw, some blankets. You can sleep there tonight. We will head out to my ranch at first light." "Where is your ranch?" Rose asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "About 8 miles north of here. Small operation. I run cattle mostly, some horses. It's just me and one hired hand, an older fellow named Pete who does the cooking and helps with the heavy work." Isaac finished with his horse and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want you to understand something, Miss Victoria. I did not ask for this situation and I do not hold with owning people, but I also was not going to let you go to Thornton. Man's got a reputation for being cruel." "So what happens now?" Rose asked, wrapping her arms around herself even though the night was warm. "What do you expect from me?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "I expect honest work. The ranch needs help. Cooking, cleaning, mending, garden work. Same things you do in any household. I will provide room and board and I will treat you with respect. When I figure out a way to make this right, I will." "Make it right how?" "I have not worked that out yet," he admitted. "But I do not intend to keep you bound by a contract made under duress. Give me time to think on it." Rose wanted to believe him, but she had learned young that men's promises were cheap as fool's gold. Still, his eyes were steady when he looked at her, and he had not tried to touch her or make crude suggestions like she had feared. Maybe, just maybe, she had caught one piece of luck in an otherwise cursed situation. "The room is through there," Isaac said, pointing to a door at the back of the barn. "I will wake you before dawn. Get some rest." Rose nodded and walked toward the room, feeling his eyes on her back. The space was small but clean, just as he had said. A pile of fresh straw covered with a wool blanket made a decent enough bed, and there was even a small crate to serve as a table with a candle stub on top. She set down her carpet bag and sank onto the makeshift bed, too exhausted and overwhelmed to do anything but sit and stare at the flickering shadows on the wall. She must have dozed eventually because the next thing she knew, someone was knocking gently on the door. Rose sat up, her neck stiff from the awkward angle she had been sleeping at. Gray light filtered through the cracks in the barn walls. Dawn was breaking. "Miss Victoria," Isaac's voice came through the door. "Time to go." Rose stood and straightened her dress as best she could, running her fingers through her tangled blonde hair. She had not even bothered to braid it last night. She must look a fright. Not that it mattered. She picked up her bag and opened the door. Isaac was already leading his horse out of the barn along with a smaller chestnut mare. "You can ride?" he asked. "Some," Rose said. She had learned as a girl back before her father died and everything fell apart. It had been years, but she thought she could manage. "Good. This is Clementine. She's gentle." Isaac helped Rose secure her bag to the saddle, then gave her a hand up. His touch was brief and impersonal, but Rose still felt herself tense. He mounted his own horse with easy grace and led the way out of town. They rode north as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky from gray to pink to brilliant blue. The land around San Antonio was scrubby and dry this time of year, late September of 1878, with the brutal summer heat finally starting to ease. They passed fields of cotton and corn, small homesteads with thin chickens scratching in the dirt, and long stretches of open range where cattle grazed on tough prairie grass. Isaac did not talk much as they rode, and Rose was grateful for the silence. Her mind was too full of fear and uncertainty to make conversation. She kept replaying the events of last night, the moment Marcus had offered her up like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. The humiliation burned fresh each time she thought about it. All those men staring at her, evaluating her worth. And she had just signed the paper and gone along with it because she was too frightened to do anything else. The sun was well up by the time Isaac turned off the main road onto a smaller track that wound through a grove of live oak trees. The ranch appeared gradually, first the outline of a barn and some corrals, then a small house with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was modest but well-maintained, with a vegetable garden enclosed by a split-rail fence and a windmill turning slowly in the breeze. Chickens pecked around the yard, and she could see several horses in the corral, along with what looked like a small herd of cattle grazing in a fenced pasture beyond. An older man came out of the house as they rode up. He was bow-legged and grizzled, with a face like tanned leather and bright blue eyes under bushy gray brows. "That you, Isaac? I was starting to wonder if you were going to spend all your winnings in town." "Something like that, Pete," Isaac said, swinging down from his horse. He helped Rose dismount, then turned to face the older man. "This is Miss Rose Victoria. She will be staying with us for a while. Miss Victoria, this is Pete Dawson. He keeps this place from falling apart." Pete's sharp eyes took in Rose's appearance, her wrinkled dress and the exhaustion on her face, and his expression grew guarded. "That's so. You going to tell me the story, or am I supposed to guess?" "Inside," Isaac said shortly. He took the horse's reins and handed them to Pete. "Put these away for me. I need to talk to Miss Victoria." Pete nodded slowly and led the horses toward the barn, but not before giving Isaac a long, measured look that suggested there would be a conversation later. Isaac gestured for Rose to follow him into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a pair of worn armchairs near the fireplace. A short hallway led to what Rose assumed were the bedrooms. Everything was clean but had the slightly dusty, neglected look of a place where only men lived. "Sit down," Isaac said, pulling out a chair at the table. Rose sat, clutching her carpetbag in her lap. Isaac remained standing, his back against the counter, arms crossed. He looked tired, she realized. Maybe he had not slept either. "I want to be clear about the situation," Isaac said. "Last night I won a poker game. Your stepfather could not pay his debt, so he offered you up on a contract. I took that contract instead of letting it go to a man I know to be violent and cruel. Now you are here, and legally you are bound to work off that debt through service. That is the situation as it stands." Rose nodded, her throat tight. "What I want," Isaac continued, "is to find a way to undo this without putting you in danger, but I need to be smart about it. If I just tear up the contract and send you back to town, Webb will likely try the same thing again with someone else, or he will make good on his threat to accuse you of theft. If I try to pay him directly, he will just gamble it away and end up in the same situation. So I need time to think." "How much time?" Rose asked. "I do not know. A few weeks, maybe a month. In the meantime, yes, I do need help around the ranch. Pete and I are not the best at keeping house, and there is more work than 2 people can manage. If you are willing to do that work, you will have a safe place to stay, food to eat, and my word that you will be treated with respect." It was more than Rose had hoped for, honestly. And Isaac Caldwell seemed like a decent man, at least so far, but she had been fooled before. "And if I refuse?" Isaac's expression did not change. Then I will take you back to town right now and you can take your chances. I will not force you to stay, but I think you know what's waiting for you there. Rose thought about Marcus, drunk and mean and always looking for a way to make a quick dollar. She thought about men like Thornton, with their cold eyes and cruel hands. She thought about the sheriff, who would believe whatever story Marcus told him because that was easier than standing up for a woman with no family and no standing in the community. Isaac was right. She had no good options. But at least here she might have a chance. I will stay, she said quietly, and I will work, but I want your word that you will not, that you will keep your distance. You have it, Isaac said immediately. You will have your own room with a lock on the door. I will not touch you unless you ask me to, and I will make sure Pete understands the same. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. Relief flooded through Rose, so strong it made her dizzy. She had been preparing herself for so much worse. Thank you. Isaac nodded and pushed away from the counter. Let me show you your room, then you can get settled while I talk to Pete. He led her down the short hallway to a small bedroom at the end. It was plainly furnished with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand, but there was a window with real glass panes and curtains, and the mattress looked clean. Isaac showed her the lock on the door, a simple bolt that could only be fastened from the inside, then left her alone. Rose set down her carpetbag and sat on the bed, running her hand over the quilt. It was a wedding ring pattern, carefully stitched. She wondered who had made it. Isaac's mother, a wife. She realized she knew almost nothing about the man who now held her contract. He could not be much older than she was, maybe 25 or 26, but he owned a ranch and spoke with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. He was also better educated than most cowboys she had met, with a way of speaking that suggested schooling. It did not fit the typical pattern of a Texas rancher. She stood and unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs on the wall and setting her mother's Bible on the small table next to the bed. The daguerreotype she propped up on the chest of drawers, studying her parents' faces. They looked so young in the picture, so full of hope. She wondered what they would think if they could see her now. A knock on the door made her jump. Miss Victoria, Isaac's voice. If you are settled, I could use your help getting lunch started. Pete and I usually just eat whatever's quick, but if you know how to cook proper food, we would appreciate it. Rose opened the door. I can cook. What do you have on hand? Isaac's expression relaxed slightly, the first hint of something like relief crossing his face. Come see. The kitchen was better stocked than Rose had expected. There were potatoes and onions in a bin, flour and cornmeal in sealed tins, a good supply of salt pork and dried beans, and even some canned tomatoes on a shelf. Someone had planted the garden outside with purpose, and through the window she could see squash vines, pepper plants, and what looked like the remains of a bean crop. Pete planted all that, Isaac said, following her gaze. He is better at growing things than cooking them. Most of the time we eat fried salt pork and beans. I can do better than that, Rose said, and felt a small spark of something that might have been satisfaction. At least here she could be useful. At least here she had a purpose beyond being an object to be bought and sold. She set to work, and it felt good to have something to occupy her hands and mind. She diced potatoes and onions, fried them with salt pork until everything was golden and crispy, and made a pan of cornbread to go alongside. It was simple food, but it was hot and filling, and when Isaac and Pete came in from the barn and sat down at the table, she saw genuine appreciation in their eyes. This is the best meal I have had in months, Pete said around a mouthful of cornbread. You got a gift, Miss Victoria. Just Rose, please, she said. Being called Miss Victoria made her feel like someone else, someone more formal and distant than she could afford to be right now. Rose, then, Pete agreed. He looked at Isaac, then back at her. Isaac told me about the situation. I want you to know I think what your stepfather did was lower than a snake's belly. You got any trouble while you are here, you come find me. I might be old, but I can still handle myself in a fight. Rose felt her eyes prick with unexpected tears. It was the kindness that got her, the simple decency of these two men who barely knew her but were already offering protection. Thank you. The days that followed took on a rhythm that was strange in its normalcy. Rose woke each morning before dawn and made breakfast for the three of them, big meals of eggs and bacon and biscuits that gave the men fuel for long days of ranch work. After they went out, she cleaned the house, which desperately needed a woman's touch. She scrubbed floors and beat rugs and washed windows until the little ranch house gleamed. She mended clothes and linens, her needle flying through tears and worn patches. She tended the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables and planning for a fall planting. She cooked dinner every evening, experimenting with the ingredients on hand to create meals that brought genuine smiles to the faces of Isaac and Pete. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and Rose found a strange comfort in it. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She had her own room with a lock on the door, plenty to eat, and no one bothered her or made demands beyond what was reasonable. Isaac kept his word about keeping his distance, speaking to her politely but briefly, always maintaining a respectful space between them. Pete was warmer, more grandfatherly, quick with a joke or a story to lighten the mood. But as the days turned into weeks, Rose began to notice things. Small things. The way Isaac's eyes would linger on her for just a moment when he thought she was not looking. The way his voice softened slightly when he said her name. The way he always made sure she had the choicest piece of meat at dinner or the most comfortable chair by the fire in the evening. She noticed other things too. The way he treated his animals with patience and care, never raising his voice or his hand in anger. The way he dealt fairly with the few neighbors who came by, whether they were wealthy ranchers or struggling homesteaders. The way he read books in the evening, real books with thick spines, not just newspapers or dime novels. There was a depth to Isaac Caldwell that intrigued her, made her curious in ways she had not expected. One evening about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rose was washing dishes when Isaac came in from checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. His shirt was streaked with dirt and sweat, and there was a long scratch on his forearm where the nervous horse had caught him with a hoof. "Let me clean that," Rose said, setting down her dish rag. "It could get infected." Isaac looked like he might refuse, but then he nodded and sat down at the table. Rose fetched clean water and cloth, along with a tin of salve that Pete kept for injuries. She sat down next to Isaac and took his arm gently, examining the scratch in the lamplight. It was not deep, but it was long, running from his wrist to his elbow. "This might sting," she warned, then began carefully cleaning the wound. Isaac did not flinch, though she saw his jaw tighten slightly. His arm was warm under her fingers, the muscles corded and hard from years of physical labor. She found herself very aware of how close they were sitting, how she could smell the honest scent of his sweat mixed with hay and leather. "You have steady hands," Isaac said quietly. "My mother taught me how to tend wounds," Rose said, keeping her eyes on her work. "We did not have money for a doctor most of the time." "What happened to her? Your mother?" Rose's hand stilled for a moment. "Consumption. It took her slowly, over about 6 months. By the end, she could barely breathe." "I am sorry. That is a hard way to lose someone." "What about your family?" Rose asked, resuming her work. She smoothed salve over the clean scratch with gentle fingers. "How did you end up with a ranch at such a young age?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment. My father owned this land. He was a hard man, believed in discipline and duty above all else. My mother died when I was 12, and after that he got even harder. When the war came, he went off to fight. He did not come back. I am sorry, Rose said softly. It was a long time ago. I was 17 when I got the news. I have been running this place on my own ever since, with Pete's help. It has not been easy, but we make it work. Rose finished bandaging his arm and sat back. There, keep it clean and change the bandage every day. Thank you, Isaac said. He did not move to get up, and neither did Rose. They sat there in the warm kitchen, the lamp casting shadows on the walls, and something unspoken hung in the air between them. Rose felt her heart beating faster, felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the heat of the evening. Rose, Isaac said, and the way he said her name made her look up and meet his eyes. I have been thinking about your situation, about the contract. Rose's breath caught. Have you found a solution, maybe? I have been talking to a lawyer friend in town quietly. He says the contract is legally questionable at best. You signed under duress with threats being made. If we wanted to challenge it in court, we might have a case. But, Rose said, because she could hear the hesitation in his voice. But it would mean going before a judge, having your private business aired publicly. It would mean Marcus making good on his threats, bringing up accusations of theft. Even if you were acquitted, the scandal would follow you. In a town like San Antonio, that kind of reputation would make it hard for you to find work or housing. Rose felt her hope crumbling. So I am stuck. Not stuck, Isaac said firmly. I have another idea, but I want to know what you think before I do anything. He pulled the folded contract from his vest pocket, the paper that had been there since the night he won her. He set it on the table between them. I could just destroy this, tear it up, burn it, make it like it never existed. You would be free to go anywhere you wanted, do anything you wanted. Marcus would just come after me again, Rose said, or find some other way to make my life hell. Not if you were not Rose Victoria anymore, Isaac said. His eyes were intense, searching her face. Not if you became Rose Caldwell. Rose stared at him, not understanding at first. Then the meaning hit her like a physical blow. You are asking me to marry you. I am offering you a solution, Isaac said carefully. If we married, the contract would be void. A man cannot hold a contract on his own wife. You would have legal protection, a home, security. And Marcus would have no power over you anymore. But we barely know each other, Rose said, her mind reeling. I know that, and I am not asking for a real marriage, not in all ways. It would be an arrangement, a legal protection. We could have separate rooms, separate lives. You would be free to leave whenever you wanted. I would ask nothing from you except that you stay long enough to make it look legitimate to the outside world. Rose stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing space to think. She walked to the window and stared out at the dark yard, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Marriage. To a man she had known for less than a month. It was insane. It was reckless. It was also the only real offer of freedom she had. Why would you do this? She asked without turning around. What do you get out of it? A housekeeper, I suppose, Isaac said, but there was something off in his voice, something that did not quite ring true. And the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing. Rose turned to face him. That is not the whole truth. Why, Isaac, really? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw conflict written plainly on his face. Then he stood up, closing some of the distance between them but still keeping a respectful space. Because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves better than what life has given her. Because I have spent the last 3 weeks watching you bring life back to this house, and I cannot imagine it without you in it now. And because maybe, if I am being completely honest, I am tired of being alone. The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Rose's chest. She had been so focused on her own fear and uncertainty that she had not stopped to consider what Isaac's life must be like. Alone on this ranch except for Pete, working from dawn to dusk with no one to share the burden. No family, no close friends, no woman to come home to. He was offering her freedom, yes, but maybe she had something to offer him too. Companionship, partnership, maybe in time something more. If I say yes, Rose said slowly, I want to be clear about the terms. I will not be owned, not by a contract and not by a marriage. I want to be a partner, not a servant. I want to say in decisions that affect my life. Agreed, Isaac said immediately. And if I decide to leave, you will let me go. No arguments, no trying to make me stay. You have my word. Rose took a deep breath. This was crazy. This was possibly the most reckless thing she had ever done. But looking at Isaac, at the honesty in his eyes and the strength in his bearing, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Then yes, she said, I will marry you. Isaac's expression did not change much, but she saw relief flash across his features. He picked up the contract from the table and walked to the stove. He opened the iron door and tossed the paper into the flames. They both watched as it caught and burned, curling into black ash. We will go into town tomorrow and make the arrangements, Isaac said. The Reverend can marry us by the end of the week. Rose nodded, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was making her own choice. She was taking control of her own destiny. Whatever happened next, it would be on her terms. The wedding took place 5 days later in the small Methodist church on the edge of San Antonio. It was a simple affair with only Pete and the Reverend's wife as witnesses. Rose wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that she had spent an entire evening washing and pressing. Isaac wore a clean shirt and his best vest, his dark hair slicked back with water. They stood before Reverend Morris and exchanged vows in quiet voices, promising to honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac leaned down and kissed Rose gently on the forehead, a chaste touch that still made her heart skip a beat. They signed the marriage certificate with Pete and Mrs. Morris as witnesses, and just like that, Rose Victoria became Rose Caldwell. On the ride back to the ranch, Rose kept touching the thin gold band that now circled her left ring finger. It had belonged to Isaac's mother, he told her, the only piece of jewelry she had owned. It felt heavy and strange, but also right somehow. Are you all right? Isaac asked as they rode through the afternoon sunshine. I am not sure, Rose admitted. I feel like I should be more frightened than I am. We just got married and we barely know each other. We have time to learn, Isaac said. No need to rush anything. But that was easier said than done. That night back at the ranch, Rose found herself acutely aware of the new dynamic between them. She was not just the woman working off a debt anymore. She was Isaac's wife, at least on paper. She had a legal right to be here, a legal claim to this home. But she also had no idea how to act around him now, what was expected or allowed. Isaac seemed to sense her confusion. After dinner, when Pete had retired to the small cabin he occupied near the barn, Isaac poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table where Rose was sitting. We should talk, he said, sitting down across from her, about how this is going to work. All right, Rose said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I meant what I said about this being an arrangement, Isaac said. I am not going to demand anything from you. Your room is still yours with the lock on the door. Nothing has to change if you do not want it to. But we are married now, Rose said. People in town will expect things. People in town can expect whatever they like, Isaac said firmly. What matters is what we are comfortable with. If you want to keep things as they are, Just housekeeper and employer who happen to share a last name. That is fine. If you want more, if you want a real partnership, we can work toward that. I am willing to follow your lead." Rose looked at him across the table, this man who had shown her more kindness in a month than most people had in her entire life. He was handsome in a rugged way, she had to admit, strong and capable and decent. She could do far worse than Isaac Caldwell. Maybe in time she could do more than just tolerate this arrangement. Maybe she could even learn to want it. "I think," Rose said slowly, "that we should try to be friends first. Real friends. Get to know each other without all the pressure and fear hanging over us, and then see where that leads." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his normally serious face into something warmer and younger. "I think that is a very good idea." So that was what they did. Over the weeks that followed, Rose and Isaac settled into a new rhythm. They still maintained separate bedrooms, still kept a certain physical distance, but they began talking more. In the evenings after Pete went to his cabin, they would sit together in the main room. Sometimes Isaac would read aloud from one of his books while Rose mended clothes or knitted. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Rose learned that Isaac had always wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy some of the neighboring land and run more cattle. But it was slow going, trying to build something from nothing with no family money to back him. He worked hard, saved carefully, and dreamed of the day when the Caldwell Ranch would be prosperous enough to weather any storm. Isaac learned that Rose had once wanted to be a teacher. She loved reading and learning, had devoured every book she could get her hands on as a girl. But after her father died and money became scarce, education had become a luxury she could not afford. She had taught herself as much as she could, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them, but her dreams of standing in front of a classroom and shaping young minds had faded like morning mist. "You could still teach," Isaac said one evening. "There is a need for schools out here. Families with children need someone to give them proper learning." "I have no formal training," Rose pointed out. "No certificate." "You have more education than most folks around here," Isaac countered, "and you have a natural way of explaining things. I have noticed it when you talk about books or history. You make things clear and interesting." Rose felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement. "Do you really think I could?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," Isaac said, and the sincerity in his voice made Rose's cheeks warm. As October gave way to November, the weather turned cooler and the work on the ranch shifted with the seasons. The cattle needed to be moved to winter pasture. Fences needed to be repaired before the harsh weather set in. The garden had to be harvested completely, and the root vegetables stored in the cellar. Rose worked alongside Isaac and Pete when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She also began to notice the way her feelings toward Isaac were changing. It was nothing dramatic, no sudden revelation. Just a slow, steady warmth that grew each time he smiled at her, each time he brought her wildflowers from the prairie, each time he asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answer. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, found herself disappointed on the nights when he was too tired to do more than eat dinner and fall into bed. One cold evening in mid-November, a neighbor rode up with news of trouble. A gang of cattle rustlers had been working the area, hitting several ranches in the past week. They were organized and dangerous, and several ranchers had been hurt trying to defend their herds. "You watch yourself, Isaac," the neighbor said, a grizzled rancher named Tom Harrison. "They hit my place 3 nights ago. Took 20 head before we even knew they were there. When my son tried to stop them, they beat him bad enough to put him in bed for a week." After Harrison left, Isaac and Pete spent a long time discussing precautions. They would take turns standing watch at night, keeping an eye on the herd and the property. Isaac got his rifle down from its place over the door and made sure it was cleaned and loaded. Rose felt fear coil in her stomach. "Is it really that dangerous?" "Could be," Isaac said honestly. "These men are serious criminals. They will not hesitate to hurt or kill anyone who gets in their way." "Then let them have the cattle," Rose said. "It is not worth your life." Isaac looked at her, and his expression was gentle but firm. "That herd represents every dollar I have saved for the last 3 years. Without it, we would lose the ranch. I cannot just let them take it without a fight." "We could rebuild," Rose insisted. "But if you are killed, we cannot bring you back." Isaac reached out and touched her cheek, the first real intimate contact they had shared since their wedding. His hand was rough and warm, and Rose found herself leaning into the touch. "I will be careful," he promised, "but I have to protect what is ours." Ours. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. When had it become ours instead of mine? When had Rose started thinking of this ranch as her home, these cattle as her livelihood? When had she started caring so much about Isaac Caldwell that the thought of losing him made her chest ache? That night, Isaac took the first watch. Rose tried to sleep but found herself lying awake, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak of the house. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up and put on her shawl, padding quietly out to the porch where Isaac sat in a wooden chair, his rifle across his lap, watching the dark pasture. "You should be sleeping," he said softly as she approached. "I could say the same to you," Rose replied. She pulled a blanket from inside and wrapped it around her shoulders, then sat down on the porch steps near his chair. "I could not stop thinking about what might happen." "Nothing is going to happen," Isaac said, but there was tension in his voice that belied his words. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. It was a clear night, cold enough to see their breath, but beautiful in its vastness. Finally, Rose spoke the words that had been building in her heart for weeks. "I do not want this to be just an arrangement anymore." Isaac went very still. "What are you saying?" Rose turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "I am saying that somewhere along the way I stopped thinking of you as just the man who saved me from a bad situation. I started thinking of you as my friend, and then as someone I admire. And now—" She took a shaky breath. "Now I think I might be falling in love with you." Isaac set his rifle carefully against the wall and knelt down on the porch in front of her, taking her hands in his. His eyes searched her face in the starlight. "Are you sure?" "I do not want you to feel obligated or like you owe me anything." "I am not saying this because I feel obligated," Rose said firmly. "I am saying it because it is true. I want this marriage to be real, Isaac, in all the ways that matter, if you want that too. Want it?" Isaac laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "Rose, I have wanted that since about a week after you got here. I have been trying so hard to keep my distance, to give you space and not pressure you. But every day it gets harder to pretend that I do not have feelings for you. That I do not want to hold you and kiss you and wake up next to you every morning." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Then why are we still sitting out here in the cold?" Isaac grinned and stood up, pulling her to her feet. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, really kissed her this time, with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks pouring into it. Rose melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, kissing him back with equal fervor. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was real and raw and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rose Caldwell. I think I have loved you since the night I saw you standing in that saloon, looking so frightened and brave at the same time." "I love you too," Rose whispered, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world to say. They stayed out on the porch for the rest of Isaac's watch, wrapped in the blanket together, talking in low voices and stealing kisses like teenagers. When Pete came out to take over at 4 in the morning, he took one look at them cuddled together and smiled so wide his weathered face nearly split in half. "About damn time," was all he said. The rustlers never did hit the Caldwell Ranch. They were caught a week later by a posse from town, arrested and put in jail to await trial. When the danger had passed, Rose and Isaac began the real work of building their marriage. Rose moved her things into Isaac's room, and they learned each other in the ways that husbands and wives do. They talked long into the night and woke tangled together in the morning. They worked side by side during the day, building something together that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. As winter settled in, Rose started making inquiries about teaching. There were several families in the area with school-age children who had no access to formal education. With Isaac's encouragement, she began holding classes in their main room twice a week, teaching reading and arithmetic to a handful of eager students. It was just a beginning, but it was her beginning, her dream taking shape. Christmas came, and Rose and Isaac celebrated quietly with Pete, exchanging small gifts and eating a feast that Rose had been preparing for days. Isaac gave Rose a beautiful leather-bound journal with blank pages, and she gave him a new pair of riding gloves that she had stitched herself. Pete gave them both a portrait he had commissioned from an artist in town, a small painting of the ranch house with Rose and Isaac standing on the porch. It was crude but heartfelt, and Rose cried when she saw it. The new year of 1879 arrived with hope and possibility. Rose's classes grew larger as word spread about the quality of her teaching. By March, she had 12 regular students, and families were starting to talk about building a proper schoolhouse. Isaac's cattle herd grew as well, thriving under his careful management. He bought some additional land from a neighbor who was moving east, expanding their range. Spring brought wildflowers and new calves and longer days. It also brought news that made Rose's blood run cold. Marcus Webb had been arrested for trying to rob a store at gunpoint. He was in jail awaiting trial, facing serious prison time. Rose should have felt vindicated, but instead she just felt sad. Sad that a man could waste his life so completely, could hurt so many people in pursuit of nothing but his own selfish desires. "You want to go see him?" Isaac asked when they heard the news. Rose thought about it but then shook her head. "He is not my family. He never was, not really. My family is here with you and Pete and the students who come to my classes. That is all I need." Isaac pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You are the strongest person I know." By summer, Rose realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness started in June, subtle at first but growing stronger. When she finally told Isaac, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that she might be sick on him. He was overjoyed, already planning expansions to the house to make room for a nursery. Pete took the news with characteristic gruffness, claiming he was too old to be dealing with babies. But Rose saw him carving a small wooden rattle and smiled to herself. The old man would be a wonderful grandfather figure. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Rose continued teaching as long as she was able, finally taking a break in November when she got too big to stand for long periods. Her students made her cards and small gifts, promising to work hard while she was gone. On a cold February morning in 1880, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but when she finally heard her son's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Isaac was there through it all, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement and love. They named him Samuel Isaac Caldwell, and he was perfect. Dark-haired like his father, with Rose's blue eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Pete declared him the finest baby ever born, and Isaac walked around in a daze of joy for days. Rose fell in love all over again, watching Isaac with their son. He was so gentle, so patient, changing diapers and walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed. He sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice and told stories to the baby who was far too young to understand. This was the man she had married, the man who had torn up a contract and offered her freedom, the man who had become her best friend, her lover, her partner in all things. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Isaac's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand further, hiring 2 additional hands to help with the increasing workload. Rose returned to teaching when Samuel was old enough, bringing him with her to classes where he played quietly while she taught. The schoolhouse that the community had dreamed of finally became a reality in the spring of 1881. It was a simple structure, just one room with benches and a chalkboard, but it was solid and weatherproof with windows that let in plenty of light. Rose stood in the doorway on the first day it was open and felt tears stream down her face. She had gone from being sold like property to being a respected teacher, a pillar of the community. The transformation was almost more than she could believe. By 1883, Rose was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect and was better prepared. Their daughter was born in October, a tiny thing with blonde hair and Isaac's gray eyes. They named her Martha Rose Caldwell, after both their mothers. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm over the years that followed. The children grew healthy and strong, running wild on the ranch and learning their lessons in Rose's schoolhouse. Samuel showed an early aptitude for working with horses, spending hours in the barn with his father and Pete. Martha was quieter, more bookish, often found with her nose buried in whatever book she could find. Pete grew older and more creaky, finally retiring from heavy ranch work at 72. But he remained a constant presence on the ranch, the beloved grandfather the children had never had otherwise. He told them stories of the old days, teaching them to fish and whittle, and all the other skills he had accumulated over a long, hard life. Rose expanded her school until it served over 30 students from families all over the area. She hired an assistant teacher, a young woman named Sarah who had been one of her first students years before. Together, they provided education that was respected throughout the region. Isaac became known as one of the most successful ranchers in the area, his herd numbering in the hundreds, his land stretching across thousands of acres. But more importantly, he was known as a fair and honest man, someone who could be trusted to keep his word and treat people with respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Rose into San Antonio for a rare night away from the ranch and children. They dressed in their best clothes and had dinner at the finest restaurant in town, laughing and talking like the young couple they had been when they first met. As they walked back to their hotel under the stars, Rose stopped and looked up at the sky. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If you had not been at that poker game, if you had let Thornton take the contract. If you had kept me as just a hired hand instead of tearing up the paper." Isaac pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "I think about it sometimes, and then I thank God that things worked out the way they did. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rose. You and our children and the life we have built together." "I used to think I had no future," Rose said softly. "I thought my life was over that night in the saloon, but you gave me a chance to build something new. You gave me freedom and love and a family. Everything I have, I owe to you." "No," Isaac said, tilting her face up to look at him. "Everything we have, we built together. I might have torn up that contract, but you are the one who had the courage to take a chance on me. You are the one who turned a house into a home and a ranch into a real family. Never sell yourself short, Rose Caldwell." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and created something beautiful from the ashes. When they finally pulled apart, Rose smiled up at her husband and saw her whole world reflected in his eyes. The years continued to pass, bringing changes as all years do. Pete passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, surrounded by the family he had adopted as his own. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree. Rose planted flowers on his grave every spring, teaching her children to remember the man who had been so kind to a frightened girl so long ago. Samuel grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses and cattle as his father. At 21, he married a sweet-natured girl from town named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch, starting their own chapter of the Caldwell legacy. Martha fulfilled her mother's dreams by becoming a teacher herself, attending a normal school in Austin, and returning to take over the school that Rose had founded. She was brilliant and passionate about education, expanding the curriculum and fighting for better resources for rural schools. Isaac's hair went gray at the temples, but he remained strong and active well into his 60s, still riding out to check on the herd every morning. Rose's hands grew a bit more arthritic, making it harder to do the fine needlework she had once loved, but she could still command a classroom and had lost none of her sharp wit. In the spring of 1903, 25 years after that fateful poker game, Rose and Isaac sat on the porch of their house in the warm afternoon sun. They were grandparents now, with 3 grandchildren who ran around the yard chasing chickens and each other. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to decades of hard work and careful planning. "You have any regrets?" Rose asked, taking Isaac's hand in hers. Their fingers intertwined automatically, a gesture so familiar after all these years that neither of them thought about it. Isaac considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I regret that I could not have met you in better circumstances. I regret that you had to go through that humiliation and fear, but I do not regret a single moment of our life together since then." "Neither do I," Rose said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You know, people still talk about how you won me in a card game. It has become like a legend around here." Isaac chuckled. "I did not win you. I won the right to set you free. Everything that came after that was your choice. You chose me, Rose. Every day for the past 25 years you have chosen me. That means more than any card game ever could." "I would choose you again," Rose said softly. "Every time in every life I would choose you." Isaac turned and kissed her, gentle and sweet, just as full of love as the very first time. When they pulled apart, he smiled at her with eyes that still held all the warmth and devotion of their wedding day. "Come on," he said, standing up and offering her his hand. "Let us go help Martha with dinner. I think Samuel and Elizabeth are coming over tonight, and you know how those grandkids eat. We will need to make extra." Rose took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked into the house together, partners in all things, 2 people who had found love in the most unlikely of places and nurtured it into something that would last generations. The story could have ended there, in that moment of perfect contentment. But life is rarely content with perfect moments. It always demands one more chapter, one more turn of the page. In the fall of 1910, when Rose was 52 and Isaac 57, they received a letter that changed everything once more. It came from a lawyer in San Antonio, formal and stiff in its language. Rose read it aloud to Isaac in the evening light, her voice growing more shocked with each word. Marcus Webb had died. He had spent 20 years in prison for armed robbery and had died there of a heart ailment. In his last days, he had written a confession detailing his crimes against Rose, the false threats he had made, the way he had forced her into that contract. He had also left her a small inheritance, money he had saved from prison work. It was not much, barely $50, but the letter made it clear that it was intended as a form of apology. Rose set down the letter, her hands shaking. "I do not know what to feel," she admitted. "I should hate him. Part of me does hate him for what he put me through. But mostly I just feel empty." Isaac came and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You do not have to feel anything. That man does not deserve space in your heart anymore, not even for hatred. He is gone and you are here, surrounded by people who love you. That is what matters." Rose nodded, but tears were streaming down her face. "I was so frightened that night. I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to end up used and broken and thrown away. And instead I found you." "And I found you," Isaac said, pulling her close. "The best thing that ever happened to me came out of that terrible night. I cannot explain it or justify it. I just know that I thank God every day that I was sitting at that table." They held each other as the sun set outside. Two survivors of a terrible situation that had somehow, impossibly, led to a beautiful life. The $50 from Marcus Webb went into a fund for Martha's school, buying books and supplies for students who could not afford their own. It seemed fitting, turning his final gesture into something that would help educate children and give them opportunities that Rose had almost been denied. The years continued their steady march. Isaac and Rose celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in South Texas, spanning over 10,000 acres and supporting multiple families. The school that Rose had founded had expanded into a full elementary school with 4 teachers and over 100 students. They stood on the porch of the house that night, the same porch where they had shared so many moments over the decades. Music and laughter floated out from inside where their family was celebrating. Rose leaned against Isaac, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. 50 years, she murmured. "How did we get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Isaac said, his voice rough with age but still strong. "We worked for this, we fought for this, we chose this every single day." "Do you remember the night you tore up that contract?" Rose asked. "Like it was yesterday," Isaac confirmed. "I remember thinking that it was the most unjust thing I had ever seen, and I had to do something about it. I remember being terrified that you would reject my help, or that I would somehow make things worse. And I remember the first time you smiled at me, really smiled, and thinking that I wanted to see that smile every day for the rest of my life." "You got your wish," Rose said, smiling up at him. "And I got mine. I got freedom and love and a family and a purpose. I got everything I ever dreamed of and more." Isaac bent down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that had not faded despite 50 years of marriage. "I love you, Rose Caldwell, until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Rose whispered. "Always and forever." They went inside to rejoin their family, their hands clasped together as they had been for 50 years. The party continued late into the night, full of stories and toasts, and the kind of joy that only comes from a life well lived and love well earned. Isaac Caldwell passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1931, at the age of 78. Rose held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and promising that she would see him again someday. They buried him next to Pete on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the oak trees that had grown tall and strong over the years. Rose lived another 7 years, continuing to be active in the school and the ranch management until her health began to fail. She spent her final days surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of the Wild West days when she had been young and life had been hard but full of possibility. She talked often about the night in the saloon, not with bitterness but with wonder at how something so terrible had led to something so beautiful. She told her granddaughters about the importance of courage, of taking chances, of believing that they deserved better than what life handed them. She told her grandsons about the value of kindness, of seeing people as more than their circumstances, of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. On a warm spring morning in 1938, Rose Victoria Caldwell passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80. They buried her next to Isaac, and the entire community turned out for the funeral. Former students spoke about how she had changed their lives through education. Neighboring ranchers talked about her strength and wisdom. Her children and grandchildren shared stories of her love and laughter. The Caldwell Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. The school that Rose founded became a regional institution, known for academic excellence and producing graduates who went on to do great things. And the story of how Rose and Isaac found each other, how a cowboy tore up a contract and offered freedom instead of ownership, became a legend told and retold, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, love and decency can triumph. In the old ranch house, now preserved as a historical site, visitors could see the room where Rose held her first classes. They could see the porch where Isaac and Rose sat and talked for hours. They could see photographs of the family growing over the years, smiling faces full of life and love. And in a frame on the wall, protected behind glass, was a replica of the contract that had started it all, with a note underneath explaining how Isaac Caldwell had torn up the original in an act of defiance against injustice. The real contract, of course, had burned in the stove that night so long ago, turned to ash and smoke and lost to history. But its memory lived on, a reminder of a time when one person's choice to do the right thing had changed the course of multiple lives. It was a story of courage and kindness, of love found in unexpected places, of two people who built something lasting from the wreckage of a terrible moment. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, and it was, for generations to come.